The message today, we're going to kind of get back to basics in a sense. Back to basics. We want to prove that God exists through looking at intelligent design, and that the Bible is His Word. That's kind of like the basics. Because a lot of people believe in evolution. Even though a lot of new data would tend to disprove evolution, they come up with a new twist on it, kind of like the new version of evolution. Maybe it was seeded from outer space, but they're not going to give up the idea. We will not accept that there is a supernatural source for the world. But actually, if you think about it, you can't explain this world without a supernatural source. You all know it had a beginning, so what was there before the beginning? Anyway, can we really know? And I would argue that true science does not undermine God, it supports God. And of course, they call it intelligent design. And I talked to a biologist, this is years ago, I'm going to all the reasons why, about would they consider teaching that in biology. The guy went bonkers. You'd think he'd just say, well, no, that's not what the science community wants. He went like, got angry. Yes, Shakespeare says, I think he protested too much. Because I realize the evidence is hitting them over the head, the complexity of every single cell in the body. You can't explain that, without a designer. So unequivocally, true science supports it. The biggest thing is, evolution said a few simple little cells, what's one little blob cell, and then kind of came out of a swamp, then they got together, created bigger and bigger organisms, and then through, selection, of the fittest, we got more complex organisms, and just give it enough time, anything is possible. Well, what they have discovered, there is no such thing as a simple one-cell animal. Every animal, plant, animal, every cell has to have a complex set of data before it does anything. Of course, it gets it from its parents and grandparents through the DNA and RNA and a few other structural things you inherit. And as some scientists and mathematicians said, the coding, it's really like a computer code that tells your cell to build engines, and then how those engines should make that cell do whatever it does. And cells do miraculous things. Well, of course, brain cells, that's quite miraculous, but, blood cells and lung cells, all the stuff they do, and you're going to tell me, and it's all, and even including behavior and talents and instincts in animals, all that comes out of the DNA. And as one scientist put it, this complex code, 3 billion base pairs. I don't even fully explain it, but I do know this much. If you have unbelievable coded data in every cell, code means you have to have a coder. Because it does what it does. If you mess up a few of those cells, it doesn't work. Or it works with a lot of problems and diseases and weaknesses. And the laws of entropy, by the way, the laws of entropy say over time, you don't get more and more order. You actually get less and less order. You can try that. You take a barn out in the back of your land. If you don't repair it, maintain it, etc., it's going to eventually become sawdust. It may take a while, but you'll see. I've seen old barns that they fall in and collapse. You know what I'm saying? You take anything you can think of. If you don't repair it, maintain it, whatever that means, and that it will go into disorder. And the laws of entropy say that probably more mathematically than I could explain it. But for certain proteins in the body, the chance of them happening by pure luck is 10 towards the 120th power. That is a huge number of zeros after the one. I mean, it's a huge number of zeros. There's no way. And I heard this the other day, and he rattled off a statistic that I didn't write down, but if gravity was just a little bit weaker, what we know would fall apart. If it was a little bit stronger, it would crush things. It wouldn't work. It's fine-tuned to like 0.001. I mean, really fine-tuned. And that's true of a lot of other laws of physics. And even scientists admitted the thing that they say that's most intriguing about the universe that they can't explain is how fine-tuned it is. Let me just give you one simple example. It's easy to understand. If you looked at the Earth and the Moon, they now know the Earth has a tilt, and the Moon helps hold that tilt. And that's part of the seasonality. And also helps hold the spin of the Earth, part of the seasonality, days and seasons and all that. If the Moon were not exactly positioned, it wouldn't work. For instance, if the Moon were just a little closer, it would mess up the tilt, the season, but also it would create tides in the ocean that would swamp the land. If the Moon were back just a little further, it wouldn't stir the oceans enough to create enough oxygen and for sea life. And actually, we have to have sea life to create the oxygen for the land life. They're all related. And that's a fine tuning. I think we can kind of see that and understand it. But some of it's more technical, but it's still very fine tuned. I want to go through some scriptures where you'll see that the Bible, people in the Bible knew some of these things thousands of years before the instruments we now have to measure them even existed. How did they know it? Because God knew it and inspired it. Isaiah 40:22. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth. How about that? Jeremiah 33:22. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered. You realize that they now have another telescope further out than the Hubble. It's further out in orbit, so it's got a better view and it's more powerful. They pick, I read this, they pick a part of space, they see a little darkness, and they will leave with some film. They just leave us focus on that for a week. And then they come back and they develop the film. It turns out there are galaxies there. They're just so far away, it takes time for the light to make an impression on the telescope. And at least from the perspective of human beings, even though we're well positioned in the galaxy to look at the rest of the galaxy, they can see no end to the universe. I'm not saying it doesn't have an end. It's just, it's so far beyond our instruments. It's as if that scripture, the stars cannot be numbered. They're so great, there's so many, they're so far away, and they're expanding, they're getting further and further away, that they can't see the end of it. Job 28:25. When he gave the wind its weight and meted out the waters by measure. They thought for years air had no weight. They didn't have instruments to measure. Now we have barometers. And by the way, you all know from watching Dave Grant on the weather that lows and highs in air are pivotal points in the weather. You're in generally when you're in a real cold place, it's a high. In other words, the weight of the air is high. When you have a lot of rain and snow, it's low. Anyway, these are things that they did not know. And the earth is a water recycling machine. Ecclesiastes 1:7. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. And then it goes on to talk about it. Well, I've seen it in several museums. You probably have too. The earth is a watertight aqua machine. And the rain comes down, and there are a lot of big underground rivers that we can't see, but they now know. How they figured it out, I don't know. All these underground and surface water eventually go to the ocean. And then in the ocean, it's evaporated by the sun into clouds, and it comes back down. So it's like a cycle. But the ocean keeps the same salinity. Yeah, that's kind of a bit surprised, just what the sea life is used to. And it works. And they tried to do that little experiment with a big globe and put some sea life in there. They couldn't make it work. Everything died. So what you think is simple is not. God planned all that. This is Leviticus, written in 1406 BC. It says, Leviticus 17:11, life of the flesh is in the blood. And I told that story about George Washington, how when he got an infection, doctors didn't know that back in his day. They bled him because they thought that would help. That actually made it worse. That might have actually killed Washington more than the infection. Life is in the blood. They now know that, by the way. And on the battlefield, when you triage, the big thing is, and you'll see that in a lot of the TV shows as well, you don't want them to bleed out. You want to stop the bleeding, worry about the internal injuries and stuff later, but you got to stop the bleeding or they're gone. You lose a certain amount of blood, that's it. And we could talk more about the blood, but you get the point. David marveled at the skies when he saw them. And he said in the Psalms that our bodies are wonderfully made. And they really are. Intelligent design is scientific. It'd be like if you ran across a computer system that maybe had a sundial to replenish the battery. Everything ran like it should. You said, isn't it amazing how millions of years of sand just created this computer running this system of whatever it runs? You'd be laughing. You know, somebody had to design that, plug it in and start it and probably maintain it. It's not going to happen by itself. Well, that's true of the universe we live in. Job 26:7. God stretches out the north over the empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. You know, ancient men actually thought, and you have pictures of it in your library, the world stands on Atlas's shoulders. You know, and they thought the world was flat and the water would go off and fall off the edges. And that's what the sailors feared when they left with Christopher Columbus, that he barely kept them from mutiny before they found the Caribbean islands. But the point is, who would have guessed the earth hangs on nothing? Because you can't see magnetism. It's like nothing. The earth is out there in space. It hangs on nothing. Well, how was that known by Job probably 3,000 or 4,000 years ago? Because God told me that's how he knew. I mean, and I want to read a story, speaking of animals, but animals are well designed. We probably don't even appreciate it. Do you know that there are dolphins who have sonar? They can find fish hiding in the bottom of the ocean under a little small layer of sand. Then, they hide from predators who want to eat the fish. Think about that. Dolphins have sonar. And bats have, they can pull out these squeaks and their heart beats real fast at an unbelievable rate. So the bats at night can find all these bugs in the air, and the bugs are moving around, but the bats can eat, and they eat a lot of bugs because their radar is that good. Of course, mankind has learned. By the way, just for the sake of it used to be when they, in World War I and World War II, until later, right near the end, they dawned on them. They had submarines with pointed bows. You see that? Like they'd cut through the water. Well, they learned that hydraulics don't work that way. I can't explain it. That bottlenose shape that whales have and dolphins have and sharks have, that actually creates less water resistance. You'll notice the big new atomic subs have that bottleneck shape. They got that from nature. Well, how did the dolphins and the whales and the sharks figure that out? They didn't figure it out. God designed it. He knows what he's doing. And, they can swim fast through water because they're designed for it. Of course, man is learning. Matter of fact, a lot of things that are done, they looked at nature. That's a key because it's well designed. Animals are well designed. I saw one of a cat, just real briefly. Cats have a very flexible spine. They talked about how wonderful. And so in some way that if you throw a cat off a 2-story building, and they gave a scientific name for it, his spine is able to rotate that cat so he lands on his feet. And its spine is so flexible, it's highly unlikely the cat will get hurt. And he can jump in the air after, say, a bird is taking off. And with that spine, he has a great chance of catching the bird before he gets out of the grasp of the cat. He's got whiskers, so he can chase a mouse down a tunnel, and the whiskers will let him know how much he can get in there to get the mouse hearing. And that's just one animal. You could say that about all kinds of others. They're well designed to do what they're supposed to do. Anyway, so this is an animal joke called My Favorite Animal. This is Bad Little Johnny. The teacher asks all the kids, what are their favorite animal? And little Johnny says, my favorite animal is fried chicken. The class laughs it up. The teacher doesn't think it's so funny. He says, well, when I went home, told my parents about it, they thought it was funny. Fried chicken is my favorite animal. And I did too. And my dad said, well, the teacher's probably in PETA and doesn't like the idea of people eating animals. He says, but I think it's funny. He says, especially, anyway, he rattled off the animals he likes to eat too. Anyway, the teacher sent him to the principal's office. And I told the principal what happened. He laughed too. He thought it was funny. Favorite animal is fried chicken. But the teacher said, yeah, I think it's funny, but don't do it again. You don't want to make the teacher mad. So the next day, the teacher asked all the kids, what's their favorite live animal? And I told her it was chicken. And she asked me again, so why is chicken your favorite live animal? Because you can turn it into fried chicken. The teacher, I ended up in the principal's office again. The principal thought it was funny too. He laughed and said, but don't do it again. He says, I don't understand. My parents taught me to tell the truth. That is my favorite animal, fried chicken. And people think it's funny. The principal said, yeah, but it'll make the teacher mad. So today my teacher asked me to tell what famous person I admired the most. And I told her, you ready for it? Colonel Sanders. Anyway, but really there is evidence that every animal, including chickens, are well designed to do what they do. Actually, one of the best, they now know one of the best sources of nutrition are eggs. They didn't know that. They thought too much cholesterol. They don't think that anymore. And so chickens can give us eggs. Anyway, I'm going to that right now. But so intelligent design is one thing that proves God exists. And there's a lot more. We have a podcast that talks about it, and I think it was on 2 weekends ago. So you can look at it for more details on intelligent design. And you can actually find some good discussions with scientists and mathematicians. And there are all kinds of things that cannot be explained except for an intelligent designer, a coder. Because if the data has to be there for life to work, when the father and mother's DNA gets together and becomes a zygote, that cell turns into magic. Biologically speaking, it comes to life and starts growing all kinds of things, but it's under the control of the instructions it got from the DNA and RNA, and there's probably a little more to it that they haven't yet discovered, but that's it. Now let's look at the other half of this, the Bible being verified, the veracity of the Bible. There are many things in the Bible that you could look at, but the one that is most bothersome by scholars is the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel has so many details that cannot be explained away well, he just got lucky. He made a good guess. Just too many details in the book of Daniel. I'm going to just look at a little of it today, though we have a podcast that talked about that. So last night, and you can watch it in one 12:24, with more details and the article that goes with it. But I want to look at the 70 years prophecy. It's just one. Daniel 9:24. Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined from your people and from your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah. And 62 weeks, he comes back. Okay. And then it says, Daniel 10, he's a man, a prophet greatly beloved by God. Well, the decree went out in 457 BC. So if you, a day for a year is one of those principles in Bible prophecy. So if you multiply 69 times 7, you get 483 years. From that date, and you have to add 1 for the year 0, because you come down from AD to 0, and then from 0 go back, from BC to 0, and then from 0 to 1 go to AD. So you have to add 1 year. That takes you to 27 AD. That's when Jesus started his ministry. There's some scholars try to push it a year or two, but it's amazing. And that means 3.5 years later, Christ died in 31 AD. The point I want to make is Daniel made that prediction. Daniel is written, except for a few minor things in the end when he entered the service before he died of the Persian Empire. Everything was written in 539 BC. Now, that means 5.5 centuries in advance, he predicted the Messiah's coming. By the way, you'll notice when you read the New Testament, a lot of the Jewish people were expecting the Messiah based on Daniel and other things. And that's one of the issues that you see in the background of the New Testament. And I'm giving an opinion. You're going to say, well, if they thought the Messiah was likely to come in that time period, why were the leaders, the scribes, Sadducees, Pharisees, so much against Christ when he came? One, it's the devil is one reason for it. But apart from the devil's influence, I think, especially the Pharisees, I can imagine how they would think. They'd say, well, if the Messiah is going to come, he's surely going to be one of us. He's going to go through one of our academies in Jerusalem that trains rabbis. They had their own high priest. Paul was a disciple, a student of Gamaliel. So Paul went to one of the best academies they had in those days. So they would assume he'd be one of us. And the Sadducees probably said the same thing. So the scribes. Well, it turns out this guy, and I'm saying the way they would think, from the boonies, because Galilee was considered way up there in the boonies, the way they thought Jerusalem. This guy from the boonies comes out, big crowds, he starts preaching, he's the Messiah. And he didn't go to any of our schools. Did he go to any of your Pharisee school? No. Did he go to any of your Sadducee school? No. Scribe schools? No. They even asked him, where did you get all this knowledge from? And he, even at age 12, went to the temple, and he amazed the doctors of the law and probably the leading rabbi. Where did this kid get all this knowledge from? And even, I think when he got his ministry first started, went back to his home synagogue, they even said, where did he get all these great teachings and words from? He certainly didn't learn it from us in this synagogue. Where did he get it from? The way they viewed it, he came out of nowhere. And they wanted credit for the Messiah. He's an outsider. You even see that feeling in Washington. You're an outsider, and we don't tolerate outsiders, So I think, but they were expecting something. Even Herod, he had a bad attitude about it, of course, but he was fearful because of what Daniel predicted. Maybe this is the Messiah. It's going to be born soon. And Herod said, kill all the boys in that age range to be sure he's not born, because he might replace me. That's evil thinking. If it's God's will, it'd be stupid, but there were evil people in those days. So they kind of expected something to happen. Daniel 7, verse 1. Daniel 7:1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions. I saw in my visions by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Verse 3. And 4 great beasts came from the sea, each different from the others. Now, obviously, there's a whole lot you can say about the book of Daniel. We're not going to get into it all. But he saw the 4 great empires in the center of the world. And really, they were the only 4 that would meet all the criterions. It was the Babylonian Empire, then defeated in an almost amazing way by the Medes and Persians. And Daniel said there'd be 2 horns, the Medes and the Persians. And the ones who came out leading at first, the Medes, eventually the one on the bottom, the Persians, would dominate, become the longer horn. That's true. And then there's the Greek Empire. And Daniel describes how this big horn, this is the Greek Empire, almost seems to fly and smash the Persian Empire and stomps it. Everybody agrees that's Alexander the Great, with amazing speed. Think about Alexander the Great. He started about, his dad died, who was building the army to get revenge for Greece and to invade the Persian Empire. So he took the army. I think he took philosophers like Socrates with him. Anyway, Alexander the Great crossed the ocean over there into the Persian Empire. He was only about 18, going on 19. He conquered the whole world and by the standards of those days, lightning speed. Just went down the coast. And matter of fact, when he finally got to Egypt, they saw all the countries he had destroyed that tried to resist him, like Tyre. By the way, Tyre's an interesting story. He had conquered a lot of those coastal cities coming down what we call Asia Minor, if you think of a map in your mind. And Tyre, its big center was a mile off the coast. They had a land one too, and so they were like an island fortress with big walls, an island. They were the financial, naval center. They were kind of like the New York trading center of the world. They said, you can't touch us. You got a land army. We got a fortified island. What did he do? He built a causeway for that mile, and he could meet all. So all of a sudden, he connected to the island and conquered it. And I think it shocked people. When he got to Egypt, they said, wait a minute, we don't want to fight you, Alexander. They say, we believe you're a god. We surrender. And the Egyptian Empire, which is pretty big, just surrendered. And when he got to Jerusalem, same thing. They said, we don't want to fight you. The rabbis came out and said, Alexander, you're in the book of Daniel. You are that great. That's what they told him. And he was nice to the Jews. And anyway, he conquered the whole world. And then Daniel said, and at the peak of his power, he suddenly dies. Or he's broken, and he died in his early 30s, mysteriously. Maybe he went to a party and got phlegm in his throat, whatever it was. He just suddenly was gone. And normally you would think he did have a wife back in Greece and a 9-year-old son. You think they would inherit it. But they were killed in the power struggle. You get a grand empire like that, it was huge. From India all the way across Europe and most of what was considered the civilized world, down to Ethiopia and North Africa, was all his empire. They were killed. And what happened was his 4 top generals divided up the empire. They didn't have the power and swagger that Alexander had, which is what Daniel said would happen. And you're going to say, well, how did Daniel know that? That would have been like nearly 2.5 to 3 centuries in advance. Because God inspired it. That's how he knew it. And then, of course, it goes down to the king of the north and the south, because God focuses on the Holy Land, and they were one in Egypt, and get our names, Ptolemies and Seleucids north of Jerusalem, and they fought over the Holy Land and a bunch of other stuff. So it pretty much focuses then on the king of the north, king of the south. I'm going to Daniel 7, 7, and 8. He describes the 4 empires, but then he makes something interesting. Daniel 7, 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast. This is after Babylon, Persia, and the Greek Empire of Alexander. A 4th beast, dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong with huge iron teeth. Do you know which country the Iron Chancellor and their biggest military badge is the Iron Cross? It's Germany. For those that don't know that, it's Germany, the Iron Cross. And then he talks about the 10 horns. And I'm going to the end of the statement. Before whom 3 of the first horns are plucked out of the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous, blasphemous words. Now, in 168 BC, and by the way, Daniel predicted the number of sacrifices that Antiochus Epiphanes would block. Epiphany in Greek means heavenly or exalted, high above. So this particular king of the north was pompous, and actually the Roman Empire was starting to put him down, and that made him act even worse toward the Jews. But in 168, Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple, and he was helped by Jews who betrayed their fellow Jews. He later double-crossed them, but it's a gruesome story of flattery and deception. But Daniel predicted it, and he predicted the number of sacrifices they would take away before it was cleansed. Now, it was cleansed by the Maccabees. Well, how did Daniel know that? I think because God told him that's how he would know. Well, here's what the scholars say. They realize, and chapter 11 is even worse. He goes through the history of the king of the north and south. You can look at that first 25 or 30 verses, get a history book commentary, and you'll see every 2 or 3 lines or another 20 years, another war, they war back and forth. And Daniel picked out everything, including Cleopatra, and the details are unbelievably accurate. So academia, which doesn't believe in an inspired God, said, we got 2 choices. We can say Daniel verifies the Bible, by the way, and Christ talked about in Matthew 24 about the desecration of the temple in the book of Daniel. So if you don't believe in the book of Daniel, you can't really be a Christian, because Christ gave veracity to the book of Daniel. But scholars will say, well, wait a minute. There's no way, no one could know all that many details accurately. It must be a giant forgery. The Jews must have, somewhere after that period, maybe around 150 BC, they must have rewritten the book of Daniel. Now, but they don't explain how that could be done. See, the Jews were still dispersed. A lot of them stayed in Babylon. They didn't all come to Jerusalem, and they had more than one synagogue even in Jerusalem, and they were, So what you would have to do is, you would have to find out every synagogue, and Daniel was a very popular book among Jews, Lion's Den and all that. Probably every synagogue had a copy. You have to go to every synagogue, give us your copy of the book of Daniel. We're going to rewrite it and update it, and then we'll send you an updated version. How would that work? That lets you know that it's not inspired, it's all fake. How can they do that? Now, for instance, let's say if they tried that today, and they asked everybody, throw away your Bibles, have a book of Daniel in you, and we'll give you next year an updated version of the book of Daniel for your Bible. There's no way we would accept. That's stupid. Well, it was the same in those days, except it was a much smaller problem then than it would be today, of course. It'd be millions of Bibles, but the point is, they can't explain it. And there's no historical record of them collecting all the book of Daniels and updating them. But they don't want to admit it. But there's no other explanation. The book of Daniel is inspired. Now, what you find in the book of Daniel is what I call duality. Duality means Daniel's prophecies were fulfilled, with Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire and various things through history, and Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt and restoring the temple. But duality means there's also a part of Daniel's prophecy, like the 70 weeks prophecy, that jumps from the Messiah's first coming to the Messiah's final coming and restoring the world back to a righteous kingdom. And he says the kingdom that's going to be created by the Messiah with no hands, in other words, it's spiritually done, will last forever and ever. So in the end, righteousness wins. In the end, we win. Good guys win. But, so it's dual. So it jumps. Like you go through the book of Daniel, chapter 11, everything, you can trace it back to the fights between the king of the north, king of the south. But then suddenly, it jumps to the end time. And you can tell by the way it's written, that all has not happened yet. So, and there are other prophecies in the Bible that are dual. They had a purpose in the ancient world, but its final fulfillment is yet to come. And the end of the age. And I'm going to go to 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3 and 4. 2 Thessalonians 2. Because Paul had to correct the people's Thessalonians. They were getting misinformation and they thought the end was going to come soon. Now, Paul didn't know when the end was going to come, but here's what he said, Thessalonians 2:3. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away come first. Now, a lot of people think the falling away means, the worldwide Church of God apostasy. That was only part of it. I think the great falling away is going to be huge, big. If I were to make a wild guess, we'll have to wait and see, I think the world is going to lose all faith and confidence in the Bible, and Bible knowledge will really drop low. People are going to be deceived about all kinds of things. And that, because you're going to say, well, how could the beast get people, well, let me read the rest of it, to worship him. A falling away from the truth is coming. And you can see that starting to happen in academia, they're twisting history, and they don't believe in the Bible, and they say, well, if you're a Christian, you're in a hateful group, because most of them kind of know Christianity doesn't support things like transgender and stuff, or it doesn't allow what I call sexual freedom, where you can just do anything you want, and they don't want standards. So they figure, wait a minute, the Bible has standards of conduct which we consider biased. Everyone's a hateful book, Christianity's bad, and you're just automatically bad. Some of them think that about biblical Judaism as well. Anyway, falling away comes first. The man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. Think about that. Everything that we know as religion, he's putting down. Or that is worship, so that he sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And they're going to someday have a guy who's going to take over by force the temple of God, sit in that temple, and the world will proclaim him as God. And as far as we know, the vast majority of the world will go along with it, will worship a man. You're going to say, but don't people know better than that? Well, they do now, but maybe they won't when this happens. A great falling away is yet to happen. We may not know how big it's going to be, but it's coming. Now, obviously, Antiochus Epiphanes thought how great he was, and he was defeated a few years later, and Rome pushed him. I wasn't that great, but he thought he was hot stuff for a while. It was kind of, but someone who's going to have more power and going to be even more blasphemous and pompous is coming. So I'm reading this in Daniel 11. I'm going to pick it up in verse 30. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. In other words, he's going to play with the secular Jews to turn against the Jews who are keeping their covenant with God. Verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary, that's the temple. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifice and place there the abomination of desolation. Christ referred to that. Well, people say, wait a minute, there is no temple now. When Daniel wrote these words, no temple existed, because Daniel wrote between the destruction of the first temple and before the second one was built. So there was no temple when Daniel wrote this, but he still wrote it anyway. And Christ reinforced it in Matthew 24. And placed there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. And you can just imagine a clever politician like the king of the north flattering the secular Jews. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And that's, of course, the Judas Maccabee and their revolt. The secular Jews stabbed the others in the back and were deceived and used. I want to ask the question, could liberals do that to Judah again in the future? Because roughly half the Jews in Israel are secular. They're Jewish and they keep things like the Passover Seder, but they really, at least according to some, I guess it depends on how you define it, they really don't believe in keeping one day holy for God, like the Sabbath, and they're not that religious. And Tel Aviv is a great city for all kind of wild sexual license. I don't get too specific, I don't offend anybody, but that's his reputation. In case it's a liberal center in Judaism. So much so the Hasidic Jews don't like Israel because they say it's not what it should be. They thought the nation of Israel would be very, very religious like they are, and that's life. But could they be used by a clever king of the north in the future to help them stab Judah in the back? Because that's what happened with Antiochus Epiphanes. And notice, Satan has certain patterns and strategy he uses. If it happened once, it is likely to happen again. Now I'm going to ask the follow-up question. Could America be divided and go down with the same thing? In other words, liberals in America help undermine America, making America weaker and fall from power. Do you see that potential pattern? The possibility of it? So, in closing, what should we do? We need to stay strong spiritually, because let's assume that the king of the north and Satan, who's inspiring him, and the false prophet will someday muster the power of the media, publishers. Many churches that you think know better will fall in line with the deception. That's what the Bible implies. They're going to deceive and trick everybody to follow one man. When you see Germany, which by the way was the most educated country in the world, 1930s, raising their hand saying, Heil Hitler, which means Hail Caesar. That would be the version of it. And you're thinking, this little guy, and he's getting these people to worship him. The German army took a personal oath to Hitler. And you can see the ceremonies where they did that. Something like that, but maybe even bigger, more compelling, more deceptive, is yet to come. That's how I look at the prophecies. So we need to pray that we can stay away from the bad influences that wish to pry us away from God. Stay away and don't let anything pry us away from the church of God. Don't let anything pry us away from the truth. Don't let anything pry us away from each other, because that's what Satan loves. In some ways, Satan doesn't care who wins war. I just want to see you and him fight each other and kill each other. That's his. He might decide who he wants to win too, but he's mostly concerned, let's kill enough people as you can. And the book of Daniel cannot be a forgery. And I believe it even predicted the divide of the Roman Empire between East and West with two legs. And that it's not going to be a cohesive thing near the end. It's going to be iron and clay. You saw patterns of that in World War II. And even the things that Daniel predicted, like the 10 kings in Europe, I just know it's going to come true. Now, not only is Daniel right in the past, and actually that divide of the East and West Roman Empire, that was like 1,500 years after Daniel wrote it up. Close, more or less, I'm estimating, but he's going to be right in the future. It is true. The Bible is the Word of God. So therefore, we need to listen carefully to the Word of God, understand it more deeply, and get stronger.